Hello, everybody. This is Ashton Kirsch, your host with today's episode of the Subrogation Support Network podcast. Today, we're going to have a great episode. We're going to do a little bit of self-promotion here for an excellent training presentation that me and a group of wonderful individuals are going to be presenting at the CLM Conference. We're going to be talking negotiation strategies, and I'm going to be presenting with two great people. We have Amber Guenther here, who's a claims advocate lead at Alliant broker, and Cortney Helfrich, chief personnel officer at Wilbur Group. We also have Sam Benson with Nationwide, who's going to be presenting with us at the conference, who is unable to attend today. But this is going to be really a good episode because we're going to talk some strategies. We're not going to give it all away because we need to make you want to attend this conference and hear us speak. But we're going to give you some good tips and tricks to walk away with. You'll learn more about these excellent individuals and hopefully take a bit away today. So before we start, I'm just going to let each of my co-presenters here kind of give a bit of their background. Do you want to start, Amber? How are you doing? Tell us about yourself so that the audience knows who you are.
Sure, I'm doing great. Amber Guenther. I've been in the insurance industry longer than I want to admit, but 25 years-ish. Been all over carrier side, broker side, TPA, and I started out my career in claims, personal line claims, and then moved over to commercial lines. And I feel like I've either consulted on or adjusted everything except for maybe airplanes.
Okay. Yeah, that's airplane claims can get complex. I'm handling a few of them now.
Yeah, not my expertise.
Well, that's all right. Everything else is, though. So the nice thing about Amber is Amber kind of gives us that, if you say defense side perspective on it. Much of obviously what we talk about in this podcast is subrogation related. CLM is, claims litigation management. So it's, runs the spectrum of subro, defense, work comp defense. So a lot of you attending will be obviously getting background on all of it. So these presentations that we're going to be presenting is a bit different from others in that usually I speak on solely subrogation, but this will relate to everybody. So if you're not a subro adjuster, here's your chance to take something away today. Thank you, Amber. Cortney, tell us a bit about yourself.
Yeah, so Cortney Helfrich from Wilbur Group. Can't believe I have to go after that introduction from Amber. So I am one of the individuals that actually went to college for insurance. And so it's kind of been a passion of mine from very early on. I've worked at a couple carriers, and I just celebrated 15 years at a subrogation agency. So I currently serve as the chief personnel officer, which gets a lot of questions when I'm in the speaking forums of, isn't that an HR role? And essentially, yes. But one of the things that I kept in my purview as my roles changed and I grew with the company was training and professional development, because those are my passion. So a lot of companies may have those departments in operations. I've actually kept those units under my purview because I really like to help people to succeed, and knowledge is power. So I'm very passionate about insurance and been in subrogation for a long time. I think on my end, celebrating 15 years is a pretty big feat.
Thanks, Cortney. And today we're going to talk a bit about that. We're going to talk about training. Keep it kind of higher purview, but looking into some of those things that are going to be very important for an adjuster and attorney to think about when negotiating claims on the subro and the liability side. First question, I guess during this presentation, so you know a bit about the background. We're going to talk about a lot of things. We're going to talk about the building blocks of subrogation and negotiation. We're going to talk about how to defend and how to negotiate the liability claims. Talk about building relationships. We're going to talk about anchoring deals, how to use data, analytics, recruitment and training, right? As Cortney was just mentioning. How do we train our people to make sure they know how to negotiate appropriately? From there, of course, yours truly, I'm going to discuss litigation tactics. Why it is that even when you're in the thick of it in litigation, we still need to negotiate. I'll note that, it's the 4 Asians of subrogation or of claims. That's what I always say. And it's the same on the liability side. Every case begins with identification. We need to identify the claim. Then we need to investigate the claim. Then we negotiate. Then we litigate. And when it comes down to all of those factors, litigation involves negotiation throughout the process. So I'll be talking a lot about that. when to appropriately use your leverage, use those tools in litigation to get to a deal, to negotiate. I mean, less than 2% of subrogation cases where suits filed actually result in a trial. So we'll talk a lot about those strategies, what we can do on a go-forward basis. A lot of this also going to be why negotiations are so important. Anyone who listens to this podcast knows that I'd say, if you were to look at what the most common theme is, it's probably negotiations. When I built this podcast, I was like 50-50. I was between doing a podcast on just negotiations or doing a podcast on subrogation. And I went down that route to subrogation. But in the end, this is something I'm passionate about. It's something that I think the industry gives far too little attention, to be honest. You look at the agenda for most of these conferences, there's a lot of very nuanced topics. It's, how to handle, complex litigation on a dehumidifier fire claim against an online retailer. Super important, but very niche. Negotiations applies to everything, right? Be it going out to buy a pair of pants or anything. Cortney's over there raising her hand. Cortney, what do you think about that? Why is negotiations so important?
I was thinking as you were describing like your passion for negotiation, would you put negotiation as a soft skill, like a people skill, or would you put it on the side more of like context, educational? Which platform would you put negotiations on?
I would put it on every platform. It's important to every facet and area of life. We need to just make sure that we're embracing it, right? Be it we're negotiating, that pair of jeans. I know that I train my team and I always have an inside running joke with my lawyers. Every time I go to a hotel, I'm trying to get a special price on a hotel room, and I'm like probably 99 for 100 on it too. Maybe not special price. You're getting a room upgrade and you practice it day to day. I mean, so it's educational, right? It's in practice, right? It's theoretical. There's so many different ways we need to use and embrace that skill in negotiations to kind of get to the deal that we want. And it's about day-to-day practice, right? That's where I want to, and I'll just jump into the question now because I think it's fascinating. Let's talk a bit about training. And I want to hear from both you and Amber. When it comes to making sure that let's start with you, Cortney. When you are working with new hires or current hires, how do you make sure that you find the right person to take that role that has the ability or the baseline to be able to be a great negotiator? And then how do you train those people to be better at what they're doing, given the importance of negotiations in our careers?
Yeah, I love to talk about recruiting because not everyone is like me. Not everyone had this passion for insurance or desire to have a career in insurance early on. And so some people went down other career paths. And so when I'm looking for someone who will have that negotiation skill set, I'm really looking for whatever industry that they were in, did they use negotiation skills? So there's a lot of scenario questions, but also thinking outside of the box, thinking about what negotiation actually is. So I think one really outside of the box example is when you have someone who could have been a stay-at-home parent and now they're looking to get back into the workforce. You may not think of that as they have negotiation skills, but they do. Think about how many times they've had to negotiate with individuals, whether it is paying bills, whether it is working on schedules, whether it is negotiating with teenagers and toddlers in order to get the task done. That's an outside of the box thought. When we think of, they may not have that technical background with claims, but man, they really do have that soft skills that could be developed into something. Or if we jump on the whole other end, where you go to someone who went to school for criminal justice or social services, they may have been having some negotiations with tough situations, individuals who may have had high emotions, and they had to manage their emotions and use different tactics with negotiations. May not have been negotiating monetary, but they may have been negotiating situations. And so when we're thinking about recruiting and we're having those scenario questions, always trying to keep an open mind to like, what industry did they come from? What negotiation type did they use, and were they successful for it? And so, do you guys ever recruit or kind of gear your recruiting tactics towards those that are in different industries that may not negotiate?
Absolutely. I will mention you make a really good point though, which it was perfect timing too. If you notice, my camera went off and I, was gone for a second. It's because I had my 5-year-old decide to run down and be like, "What are you doing, Dad? I'm working from home today." And I had to negotiate. I had to negotiate with him, be like, "Hey, kid, I'm doing something. Please go upstairs." I may or may not have bribed him with candy later. Who knows? But you're totally right. Like, we're negotiating daily. And it's a skill set that, it's developed, it's learned, and it's also innate. But there's, 100%. Obviously, for lawyers, it's a bit, you need to have a certain requisite skill set, right? There's a different personality for a litigator versus a transactional attorney. But I can tell you, lawyers are some of the worst negotiators out there. Absolutely.
So I'll jump in. Yeah, I'll jump in there. Both of you hit on a topic that I should have been listening instead of thinking about that. But negotiation success is just as much about delivery as is the substance, right? So just like you said, some attorneys are the worst negotiators because I feel like they get too emotional, right? It's not personal. This is not, but it is psychological. It's very psychological. And so I believe that is one of the things I believe you can train, maybe even seasoned negotiators, is how to keep that emotion out of it, how to respond with facts and data versus coming back and just saying, well, that's just ridiculous. One thing I have learned in my later years of my career is asking more questions. Why do you believe that? Where did you get that information from? Why? What facts is your demand based on? Is there jury, what am I trying to say? Court cases that you're basing this demand on? Oftentimes they don't have an answer. We just came up with that amount. We just want policy limit. We just came up with that amount. There's not a factual basis for that, right? So that for me is one of the big pieces, is the emotional piece and keeping that out of it.
Absolutely. And then briefly, Courtney, on your question, yes, we definitely do hire people based on just kind of those skill sets that we know that they can develop. We've had people come in, a lot of our subrogation, we're primarily lawyers at our firm, but a lot of our subrogation specialists that support our attorneys or maybe handle the smaller cases, most of them started as paralegals, and then we've trained them in negotiation so that they have the background in the law, and then we can train them in negotiations. But we have had some really fantastic hires who had a background in maybe something quasi-insurance related, and we were able to teach them the requisite nature of the law and what they need to know. But then also they had that skill set. I think that it depends on what you're doing, right? If you're negotiating small auto claims, then frankly, you don't necessarily need the profound, 15 years as a paralegal or attorney. You can be somebody who has that just skill set and communicate, that ability to discuss. One reason why lawyers are so darn bad at this is because, exactly as Amber had referenced, it's the lack of listening. It's wanting to convey your perspective too much. It's wanting to butt heads and thinking everything needs to be a fight. When I do my negotiations trainings for clients, my attorneys, my subro specialists, I'm always talking about two important factors. One, you catch more flies with honey than vinegar. And two, follow the 70-30 rule. Listen more than you speak. The 70-30 rule is simply that. It's listen 70% of the time, speak 30% of the time. Lawyers, awful at that. Until I started really focusing, it's the hardest thing for me. It's like, I know my case. I've researched my argument. I've got slam dunk liability. So I just want to call the other side and tell them why they're idiots and why my case should get paid and why they should roll over. But guess what? In negotiations, that's not always what works. So really, it's that ability to communicate that's huge, right? And part of that is innate. Part of that's learned through years of whatever you were doing. But no, I don't think that there's just, some going to college for something related to it isn't necessarily what you need. You could have somebody who is in sales for years that is probably the best negotiator you could find. Amber mentioned something interesting just there too that I wanted to touch on. Emotions in negotiating. So what I do is, for some of my clients, I'll come on a consulting basis, and we call it ghosting, where I'll listen to the adjusters on the phone while they're negotiating with other parties. They do know I'm there. It's not like some secret, but then afterwards I'll do an hour-long training for their team using examples of what I saw. And one thing you'll see with some very seasoned claims adjusters is they're amazing. They know their stuff like no other, but they're just butting heads. They're coming in, they're yelling at the other side's yelling at them. They're getting too emotionally attached to it, where we need enough emotions to be passionate, but we don't need enough emotions to take offense. Amber, tell me a bit about emotions in negotiating.
It doesn't work first. I believe that if you can take that emotion out of it and first challenge the premise, not the number, I believe that a lot of adjusters do get excited when they get that first number from the attorney. And they're like, this is crazy. What are you thinking? It's not based on anything. Take that out of it and just know that this is how it works. This is where, and you as the negotiator is try to de-escalate that, right? Again, like I said before, ask questions. Where'd you get this number from? What's it based on? What data are you coming with? And so for an effective response, that figure assumes liability and damages that are not supported by the facts or medical records. Our evaluation places this claim at a significantly different range, which is X, right? So you're staying calm, you're staying focused on the facts, you're not getting crazy with them, right? So as long as I stay calm to someone yelling at me or going on and on and on, and I just sit there and stay calm and listen, 99% of the time de-escalates them. Someone yelling usually doesn't continue to yell or be aggressive to someone that is not responding to that.
Yeah.
Hey, Cortney, anything to add on that?
I do. I think of the Amber, that is high emotions running into high emotions is just asking for not a resolution. We'll need to keep that in mind, because when we have, based on what the facts are and a rational process, that's where we're really going to actually make progress getting somewhere, because emotions versus emotion is just going to erupt into almost like an ego competition back and forth.
Fire.
I love how we each have our own line that we talk about as far as listening. Ours is we have 2 ears and 1 mouth. So usually, and so we spend time listening. And so I love what you talked about of just staying calm. And that is its own skill set, because when we think about us staying calm, we have to think about us staying calm, but also keeping in mind that maybe the other side is trying to get a rise out of you. Have you ever had that situation where it just felt like they just kept getting more and more trying to get a rise out of you, either to get their way or to get their number or for you to back down? Do you guys have any where you were negotiating and it turned into this emotional battle from the other side?
For sure.
Yeah, so
absolutely. Yep.
We flip it on its head. We do a lot of product defect work, a ton of it. And there's some of these component part manufacturers. I can think of one right now. Last week, one of my new associate attorneys, this guy's amazing. One of the best negotiators I've actually seen, and he's 2 years out of law school. But he's in negotiations with this component part manufacturer. The actual, the branded manufacturer tendered it to their component part. It was the valve on a dishwasher. And the response he gets from the other side, and he's on this call and he just waves me over, is this guy's yelling. He's like, I'm not paying you a dime, swearing, yelling, you're not getting anything. Sure, we're responsible. Okay, I admit it, but guess what? You're not getting anything. File suit. Basically admitting fault and just approaching it in my mind. And my guy's sitting there just laughing. I'm like, you're doing this right. You got to laugh it off. And we're feeling well, next steps, obviously we're going to have to litigate it. But I'm like, well, you might as well have some fun on the claim too. So I'm just totally appease him. It's yes, of course. I understand. And then afterwards, I'm like, just send him the nicest email ever. We really appreciate how amicable and amazing you were on the conversation today. Thank you so much for being so easy to work with. And then he CC'd me. I followed up with him and saying, I remember working with you last year. You were just a delight. Pleasure to work with. Afterwards, we got a call from the guy. And the guy was just yeah, I understood the veiled email. I get it. I'm sorry. I appreciate it. And he came back and he actually then started negotiating with us, not to the level where we're willing to accept, but there's a point where it's the idea of when you're negotiating. So negotiations professors, I always say, either in their ivory towers or in the basement behind the water heaters, wherever the colleges put them, they do a lot of these trainings on, different strategies. And one of the best strategies they talk about is transactional versus relational negotiations and bargaining. The idea is a lot of times we want to try to lead every dialogue relationally. We want to lead it with a conversation about the weather. Talk to your adversary, see how they're doing, right? I take notes on them and I talk about how I remember I dealt with Amanda from, should ABC TPA 3 months ago. And I remember her daughter had a volleyball tournament the last weekend. So I had a note on it. I mentioned that. That opens up a relationship that's huge. So we always lead relationally. One, it's better for your mental health too. I did a presentation with a guy who was a mental health expert once on negotiations. And that was a huge thing is there's a lot of premature death in our industry. There's a lot of like sickness, disease, and it's because of the stress we put ourselves through on these things. So by leading things relationally, having positive dialogues, I want the other side to smile, give them the biggest smile when they pay me 100% of my claim and they're happy about it. So it's a good way to approach it, but then understanding sometimes you will have an adversary that just leads transactionally. They come in totally transactionally, unwilling to play ball. We can try to flip that narrative, as I think Amber and Cortney both mentioned. We're going back to them. We're like, we're trying to be relational. We're going relational. Like, hey, come on, like, let's talk about this. But if they don't, we can't be pushovers, right? So you need to then move transactional. So even though we're not trying to keep communications being formulaic, there is a point where if they're just being jerks, it's time to pull the sword out, right? It's time to litigate. It's time to take action. Amber, tell me, you on the liability side are dealing with some probably crazy plaintiffs' personal injury attorneys. How the heck do you keep yourself from losing your mind when you get a demand that's $5 trillion on a slip and fall at a rest stop where the person twisted their ankle?
Mm-hmm. Going right back to you got to keep the emotions out of it. And I'm not going to lie, there's sometimes it makes me want to vomit some of this stuff that we're seeing in our litigation environment today. And we need tort reform in a big way. However, pure and simple is stay calm, right? You got to stick to the facts, stick to the liability. I don't know that thing, stay calm and move on, right? Keep negotiating. But one of the things that I often see, I guess, would be adjusters that just are not prepared to go to battle. And I guess that's the best way I can say it, with an experienced attorney or even an experienced paralegal that's doing the negotiation for them, right? And so they give away too much too soon because they do get, I guess, afraid or they get insecure about their claim, right? And what happens is now they've given away too much too soon and they have nowhere to go. They have nowhere left to go. And plaintiffs are not winning unless they think they got something, right? So if you give away too much too soon because you're intimidated and you just want to get it over with, here's my money, take it, and I'm done. Well, in my experience, a good settlement's when no one is happy. Plaintiffs are not going to be, if they perceive, well, if she came up to that so quick, there's got to be more. So they're not done. They're not happy with that. Sometimes you just have to go through the motions. You have to go through the back and forth. I've been in mediations where I'm like, I know my number. We are wasting my precious time, but ultimately, I know I have to go through the motions for plaintiffs counsel, and sometimes for the mediator too. We just have to go through the motions to get where we all know we're going to end up in the end.
Well, make sure that when you train
to your question.
That's perfect. When you train your team on that, make sure that you tell them not to give it all away at the beginning. Unless it's my attorney's calling, then please tell them to consider, if Ashton calls though, but it's a really good point. But it's also to kind of flip that on its head. It's a good point for the subrogation people to kind of recognize and realize that, hey, just because the liability adjuster, the adverse, starts off at some place that isn't necessarily where you want them to be, it doesn't mean give up. It also doesn't mean just take it. I see that a lot of times. Like, they've offered $7,000 on our $30,000 case. There we go. It's a negotiation.
Exactly.
It's a lot of times.
On both sides. You're right, on both sides.
Right. I mean, but it's a tough game when plaintiff's counsel leads at $5 trillion on the case. But then again, you just need to offer what you think is fair, right? You need to start with the number
and give your reasoning. And give your reasoning. We're making this counter based on A, B, and C, not based on emotion or policy limits or things that aren't material fact to the case.
I think there's a lot of fear now, talking more about the liability side. And I speak at a lot of conferences, as you both know, about nuclear verdicts, right? That's a big one. We're talking, our title on this is nuclear negotiation. And that did really come off of when I created that title off of the idea that half of all the presentations at conferences are on nuclear verdicts in the defense space. I think there's a lot of fear, though. I don't know if you agree with this, Amber, by adjusters that, oh man, this is a commercial auto claim. And if we don't get this settled now, what happens to my job if I don't settle it? It goes into suit and we get hit with one of these massive verdicts. Do you think that fear is real? Or how does that play out?
It's 100% real, and I am very passionate about it for the reason that carriers are putting that out there. I shouldn't say as a, it's known, right, as a reputation. Well, I know this carrier's never going to go to trial because they're too afraid. You are contributing to the environment when you do that, right? There are cases that should never, ever go to litigation because there's no merit. They should never, or I take that back. They should never settle prior to litigation because there's no merit. But for that reason that you're talking about, they do, and they settle every day. I just had a claim settle at mediation where, we can't say that word fraud, but it was 100% fraud. And we paid it at mediation because the carrier just refuses to defend in the state we're in.
And how do you flip that script? Is there a way to change that narrative, or is it just there's so much fear? And it's because obviously it's better for the carrier in general to fight these things. But on the other hand, it's better for the individual adjuster to resolve the case because they're fearful of their job. And I mean, is it that the carriers aren't doing a good enough job telling their supervisors, managers, and adjusters, hey guys, we have your back? Because I have heard about, adjusters in some industries, companies being fired because they had a really bad case go against them. And that it creates like a strange dynamic. But I'd be interested to know what you think about that.
It's a whole environment we're in right now, and it's not great. To be just truthful, I'm not sure how to combat it. It's an industry-wide issue. I'm going to say industry-wide problem, quite frankly. Plaintiffs counsel they're very structured. They talk to each other. They have this thing down, right? I think what has to happen is defense has to get on that same program. Defense counsels have to start talking to each other, sharing information, sharing data, sharing wins is a big one. When we do defend it and we win, we need to broadcast that. It's not right now. And so that fear remains, and it's going to continue until the pendulum's just going to have to switch. At some point, we're going to have to say, okay, we have to start defending versus settle before we go to litigation.
And it's harming the subrogation industry. And let me tell you why. And this is a unique perspective that I'm currently forming in my head as the words come out of my mouth. But I think it's pretty unique in that because of that, because there's so much willingness there and there's so many fraudulent, very difficult cases that'll never win that are being pushed by plaintiffs' counsel. There's a lot of carriers now that on the subrogation side, they're treating the subrogation claim on a rear end collision, very viable, as one of those other cases, expecting that, hey, we need to start super low and almost failing to negotiate those because they have less of a risk exposure. So part of that is like, well, on the subro end, we're not getting some excess verdict. We're not getting a nuclear verdict because we're capped at the damages. And you start to see that more often as, it's almost like as they started settling one side, they started to fight back further on the other. But I think it's about just like seeing every case as how it is, right? And fighting the ones you have to, but also not necessarily forcing litigation on, a $25,000 auto collision just because you're used to paying, half that amount from some sketchy plaintiff's firm. But it's interesting. But negotiation is, we have to remember, claims are not cookie cutter. And too many carriers try to treat them as such. I talk to attorneys, nobody with my firm, but I talk to attorneys defense attorneys who also handle subrogation. And firstly, that's one thing I always say, you need defense attorneys, you need subrogation attorneys. We're very, very different. But when it comes down to that, you'll be like, oh yeah, subrogation, that's where you get 60%. Hell no. On like a rear end clear liability, it's like, no, on a clear liability case, you get 100%. And on a garbage case, maybe you get 15%, whatever it is. But realizing that there's no cookie cutter approach to handling cases, to negotiating, is kind of step one in these things.
Every claim should be handled on its own merit, 100%. And those simple rear ender claims, and I'm talking from a defense, pay what you owe. Pay what you owe, nothing more, nothing less. when you owe it, why are we fighting those? But we're not fighting the ones we absolutely don't owe. So I couldn't agree with you more. Every claim has on its own merit. And you're right. Some of these, and I don't want to call them lower end, but newer adjusters, they put them on the, the front line, everyday, fender bender accidents. But in my opinion, that's where it starts. And that's where they need the most training and the most understanding of the environment. So.
Absolutely. Now, Cortney, I want to pass it back to you for some questions. Cortney, first impression principle. This is something I speak about all the time. In communications, in negotiations, your first impression means everything. It's legitimately a psychological tenet. It takes a lot, and there's been studies done to change what somebody's first impression is of you. If you're sloppy, if you send, I got a guy right now, client of mine, amazing, one of the smartest people I know, sends emails that are 3 pages long without period, punctuation, and or any sentence structure. Well, the content's great, but until I got to meet this person for years, I thought this guy was just a slob, right? And then you realize, but that's the first, it took a lot. It took 20 times of hanging out with this person for me to overcome that initial impression. So that's huge. I'd love to get your thoughts, Cortney, on when you first go into negotiations, what signals or cues are you paying attention to that shape how you begin building that relationship? And how do the first impressions kind of impact that negotiation strategy?
Yeah, I think you touched on some of it when we talk about, is it transactional or is it relationship? Knowing when you walk in, what is their demeanor? How are they looking at you? Are they looking at you like this is going to be business? We're going to go back and forth. Or are they actually open to having that small talk? Are they open to kind of sharing something and building a relationship? Because this may not be the only negotiation situation you have with that person. And so kind of thinking about which tactic are they going to use? And then when we talk about cues, you made a great point. Are they prepared? But are you prepared too? That makes a difference. Amber touched on it. Do you have your facts? Do you know what the numbers are? Are you ready to ask the questions? And so if you're prepared and the other side is not prepared, that's going to take some cues on your end about what are going to be my next steps. That they may not have all the answers right now, and they may honestly just want to loop back to this, or maybe they're looking to get this done quickly, so they did not prepare. I loved your inside information of keeping notes or a Rolodex of all this information, whether it's in your head or in another manner of the interaction that you have with people, because you're going to run into them again. At some point, you may have another negotiation with them. And so remembering, are you prepared? Are they prepared? What is their demeanor? But also their and your reputation will precede you. So what reputation have you actually built?
And it's corporate reputation too. Obviously, we can all think of some insurance carriers. You're like, oh, wow, a claim is against ABC again, ABC insurance carrier, XYZ TPA.
You know how it's going to go.
Yeah. Yes.
Yes.
You've seen some of those, Amber?
Oh, yeah. It's you already know how it's going to go when it's with ABC. Yeah.
So it's not even just the individual, it's also the company. On our end, that's why we litigate so many cases where, otherwise you don't want to be known as the law firm that doesn't litigate. In the same ways, you don't want to be the carrier that doesn't settle, because if you're the carrier that doesn't settle, guess what's going to happen? My team over here, and there's a few of them, we don't waste time with negotiating with you. We're just filing suit because we know it's not going to work. So reputation's everything. And it's also personal reputation. It's very important. But, that's how we lead, right? We lead relationally. We start trying to catch flies with honey, and we build a first impression. We double check the writing in our emails, right? If you're sending an email negotiating, guess what? I don't need you to spend 20 minutes drafting 3 sentences, but I tell my attorneys every single time, read through it at least once. Make sure it's punctuated. Will you every once in a while drop a period? Okay, not a big deal. But it should be, your emails should be like letters. It should be a formal written correspondence. That's huge. Kind of another piece of advice on that is pick up the phone. That's something I always talk about. And I'll talk a lot about this during our training at CLM. It's the idea that, people these days, and this is something to go on with training, Cortney and Amber, both of you guys, as you train new people, I notice that younger people don't know how to pick up the telephone. I was taking my 17-year-old. Yeah, my 17-year-old daughter to a birthday party.
They don't want to talk.
She legitimately is texting her friend for the address. I'm like, I'm sitting in the car, call. And she says, Dad. People don't call these days. It's embarrassing. And I always tell that story, kind of to embarrass her too. But, the big thing is email and text messages, they were created to make us more efficient, more effective. They're now totally destroying interpersonal communications. So I always encourage everyone, quick tip, takeaway from today, pick up the phone if you're training people how to negotiate, teach them how to talk over that way. Zoom, Teams, that's my favorite way. If you can talk virtually, that's huge too.
Even better, and face to face. You're not building any type of relationship over email at all. If you've never spoken to that person or ever seen their face, that's not a personal relationship building whatsoever.
Yeah, and it's special post-COVID. At first, I'm like, this is going to be awful to not be in court as much. It's going to be awful to not have mediations in person. And I have started to think about this recently, and I actually think I have better and more human communications. I mean, sure, in person, is it better than via Zoom or Teams? Yes, absolutely. But the difference between a Zoom Teams call versus a phone call or an email is so much more impactful. I talk to people. I've been on Zoom with clients for 4 or 5 years now. We've spoken 100 times. We're close friends now. We know each other well, despite us having never met in person. It's something really special that can be done. So, embrace that. If I negotiate, every negotiation I do, I'm on Teams or Zoom. So think about those ways to that's a good way to get a first impression. If you do, make sure that you look presentable. I think that's important for a first meeting. You don't need to be in a suit and tie necessarily. But I had a job interview a few months ago. We did not hire this individual, but he shows up on the Zoom with legitimately his hair every which way, just took off a baseball cap. He had his ketchup stains on his shirt. I'm like, you know what? Sorry. Impressions do matter. And whether or not you are the most genius, amazing person in the world, you don't have to have a look to you, but you have to show that you care, that you're presenting, that you're in the right place. So it is important that, because obviously that impression is going to last.
Well, that's what it says, is that you didn't care to show up for that. You didn't care about your appearance. And that means if you don't even care about your own appearance, how are you going to care about this job or, other things? Cortney, why are you shaking your head too?
Mm-hmm. That's when I was relating it back to negotiations. You come not prepared. It's like, you come not looking in a manner to where you care about yourself. It's definitely going to bring in the question, how much do you care about this claim? And so if you are able, always come prepared. That first impression, and you're talking about it on hiring, it matters with negotiations too, because they're going to look at you and they're going to try to handle the negotiation based on what you look like first, even before you open your mouth.
Absolutely. And as I said that, for the audience that can't see us, I am in my basement office. So it's cold with my hoodie on. I put my hoodie on my head and look how professional I look up here. But
Amber and I were prepared.
I didn't know if we were going to talk about that or not.
You already know me, so that's okay. If first impressions are already good or bad at this point, it's too late for that.
They've been formed.
All right. I guess last question I have before we wrap this up. We were talking during our presentation, we were talking about other industries and other kind of negotiation tips. Cortney, are there any other industries that you kind of look to for negotiations training? Anything else that, the audience should think about when trying to figure out how to become better negotiators?
Yeah, we really enjoy having police officers come. And one of the recent trainings that we had touched on a really great point. And Ashton, you talked about it with your negotiations training of talking about mental health. And so we had a police officer come in, and it was a training that was kind of geared toward de-escalation with civilians. And as they're kind of talking through it, he really touches on this really great point of some people may be going through some mental health issues that you cannot see. You cannot hear over the phone. And so as someone is escalating, there are, as far as other tactics and avenues, when you're de-escalating with them, when you're negotiating with them, especially if it's just over the phone and you visually cannot see them, to keep that in mind. And so I really like that because we're dealing with people. Both industries, whether it's insurance, whether we're talking about going to court, whether we're talking about police officers on the street, we're dealing with real people. And so having that understanding really was kind of something extra we took away from the last training, was just that thought of some people may be having some mental health items that we need to keep in mind when we're having discussions with them.
Absolutely. Amber, anything you want to add to that?
No, don't think so. I mean, I'm in agreement with the de-escalation. It's super important for the person trying to de-escalate to remain calm. It's very, like I said, whether it's, out in the real world or you're dealing with an attorney or paralegal, it's hard for them to continue to yell at you when you remain calm. If you don't come back at them, they kind of lose steam in my experience.
Absolutely.
That's it.
Well, I'll say the negotiations, I mean, it's an art, it's a science, and it's a practice skill. So I encourage everybody. I encourage you to come to CLM and attend our training. But I would also encourage every single one of you to start practicing this on a day-to-day basis, right? Because the skill sets you learn buying and negotiating for a pair of pants are the same as you use in many situations negotiating a complex fire loss. I will say that, I hate shopping, and I always use this as kind of a joke, but it's true. My wife doesn't invite me shopping anymore because of how I negotiate everything, which is a plus in and of itself, maybe. But, I'll go to the counter, and I did this not even that long ago where I had my baby and I'm like, hey, do you have a cute baby discount? I was buying a pair of jeans or a shirt, whatever it was. And they gave me 20% off just for asking, right? So it doesn't hurt to ask, save some money, but also practicing daily matters. Don't practice with your spouse and significant other. I want everyone to stay happily together. But when it comes to kind of day-to-day at the store, it's really good practice. So keep practicing, focus on negotiations. That's what we have for you today. Again, I'm going to remind you, we have this training at CLM coming up on the 26th of March at 10 a.m. Eastern in Orlando. Please join us there. We'd love to see you. If not, every single one of us, we're always here to answer questions. Feel free to reach out. Again, Cortney, Amber, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a pleasure. Until next time. Thank you guys.
Absolutely. See you guys.
All right. This is Ashton Kirsch, your host with the Subrogation and Support Network podcast, signing off. And until next time, thank you.